Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Well, good morning. I'm Leon Byner. You might recognise the voice. If you don't, lovely to meet you. Jeremy Cordeaux, unfortunately, has what we often colloquially call the dreaded lurgy. So I'll give you health progress reports during the show if anything changes, but we hope he gets better soon. Tell you what, there's been a lot of interesting things going on around Australia, and a lot of them affect you directly. And I have a very strong view that financial institutions are not just there for the shareholders and the consumer, but they're also there to enrich the well-being of our country. And the reason I bring this up is because I note today, and I'm sure you'll be pretty interested in this one, a third of the nation's bank branches have shut, a third, in the last 5 years. And the interesting thing about this is that there are more to come. Now, this then pushes people to either go to the internet or an ATM machine. However, there has been a reduction in the number of ATM machines that are available for you to use. What I'm interested in doing, and look, I have a lot of faith in public opinion and public pressure, and I know Jeremy does too. I want to know today how this is working for you, because it seems to me, I mean, if you're fit and healthy and you're able to move around and you're reasonably mobile, that gives you some sort of advantage generally when you're doing your general banking and other things. But if you're less mobile or you're stuck, then it's not as easy. And there's also the regional issue as well, because it's not just in the big cities, but it's in the regional areas where there's a very large proportion of the population that live there. And they're not very well treated, in my view, by the financial institutions. In fact, I happen to think, I'm not sure how practical this is, but I reckon we need to reform the financial institutions' rules and regulations, because it's all very nice to have the banks doing well. You only have to look at the share prices to see how well the banks are doing. But there is a responsibility that there is a service there for ordinary people, especially the strugglers, because there are lots of people who don't like to keep a lot of cash for good reasons, and security is one. In fact, God, even some banks don't have cash, which is ridiculous. But I really think that we need to have a good look at financial institutions. I'm not here to bash them, because I think in many respects we need them and they do a pretty good job, and the people who work in them are good people. But I just wonder whether we have a fit-for-purpose model of being able to get to your money when you need it. Now, I remember recently I was at a particular shopping centre and there was a technical glitch in all of the ATMs. I don't know what happened. There was maybe an electromagnetic pulse or something like that, and the whole system went down. So you had people in shops buying, groceries and other things. They'd get to the checkout. They didn't have cash on them, right? And they couldn't use their cards. So they had to go to the old manual system. Remember the old bank cards? Where you'd swipe, you'd put the card in a particular slot, and then you'd press a little bit hard and then move the slot from one to another.
Mike Smithson.
Yeah. So I think it's very important that we don't lose our ability to be close to our money. Now, one of the people whose opinion and commentary is always very valuable is Mike Smithson.
On the phone.
And he's on the phone now. Mike, good to talk to you.
Leon, it's like old times.
Yes, yes.
You're back in the chair is music to my ears, shall we say.
Well, thank you for saying that. And I've always regarded your opinions on matters always forthright and very up to date. So what's the latest for Adelaide this week, and what's happening that's going to touch people hard? Because you're always first with the stories on this, on 7.
Well, I think there have been a couple of major issues this week. And look, one that is really just popping up today, it's almost breaking news, is that there's conjecture now about the Aboriginal flag being flown at half-mast, the Indigenous flag around town hall sites. I mean, talking about the town hall itself and Victoria Square, the giant flagpoles there, that the Lord Mayor made an executive decision to instruct council staff to lower the flags to half-mast, and this was on advice from Indigenous groups, and it is basically for a week of mourning. Now, it's transpired that she had no executive authority to do that. It's not in the Local Government Act. And what it's done, if you cast your mind back to the referendum, look, 64% of South Australians or thereabouts voted no for the voice to Parliament. That personally, I think it's time to move on from all of this. And if you are trying to show some respect for those who feel they've been given a bad deal, and I'm talking about Indigenous groups, I'm not sure a public showing of lowering a flag to half-mast, which is a very symbolic gesture, especially when you don't have the permission to do it as Lord Mayor. I think it showed incredible political naivety on her part, that you just don't do that sort of thing without a council motion on it. And as a result, the flags are now being raised, although I think some are half up and some are fully up, and that makes it even worse.
Mark, Mike Smith, I just find it odd. Jane Lomax Smith is no fool. She's a clever lady. Would she not have been aware of the ramifications of this?
Well, I think it was a knee-jerk reaction that she thought this will be the right thing to do, and she'd been given advice by an Indigenous group, and they said this would make us feel better. Now, that may well be the case. And I'm not on the virtues of the voice and who voted yes and who voted no, but it was an overwhelming no to it. Now, it's what this effectively does is saying to the 64% who voted no, if you take this to its logical conclusion, that the Lord Mayor is personally saying to those people, you got it wrong, and now we are putting the flags at half-mast. We are in mourning as a council because South Australia got it wrong and Australia got it wrong. And it may be her belief that that is what happened, but I think when you show it publicly on a government building, or a local government building in this case, I just think it's a bad move. And I think it's equally naive of the Premier to light up South Australian monuments, and I'm talking the railway station, Adelaide Oval, Parliament and the Town Hall, in the Israeli colours at the moment of the terrorism last week. What do you reckon that's going to do for Palestinian people who are good law-abiding people who have nothing to do with Hamas and terrorism? That it's a knee-jerk reaction that is going to incense people.
Where is that going to take us? What's the next step? Because obviously it is easy to offend people these days, Mike, as you know. So what do you predict is the next thing that's going to happen over this?
Oh, look, I think in both cases that everyone's taken a long, hard breath and thought the lighting, I think, they've desisted in that, and the flags are being put back to their full mast proper position. I think it's a case now, you learn and you move on. But I think in life, if you can avoid upsetting people, avoid upsetting them. That's my general rule. You don't get a benefit out of it. And if you take sides and whether it be on the Indigenous voice or whether it be on the Israeli situation, you are going to divide a community in very volatile times. Now, I don't think that's the role of government to do that. I think it's the role of government to think things through and do what is right and proper after consideration. But both of these have been knee-jerk reactions basically the day of or the day after.
Sure.
Something has happened that affects and deeply affects a lot of people.
Look, my instinct on this, and you probably suspect my view on this, is to give people the information and give them both sides, or maybe more if there are, and let them make a decision rather than... Because I think that's... And frankly, it's better entertainment and information, because when you get everybody's side, you can actually make a pretty good decision about any matter that you've just heard about.
Well, you can, but you look at the way that the Voice was sold to Australia and to South Australia by the Prime Minister, and if that wasn't the worst sales job that I have ever seen in the history of mankind, you had almost a bottomless pit of money to prosecute your yes case. You still couldn't seem to do it. You had ample opportunity to pull the plug on it, which is what, $500 million or thereabouts referendum. What you were trying to prosecute, as I said, is a case for a fairer Australia and giving less advantaged Indigenous people a voice and make life better for them. Wouldn't the money have been better spent in Aboriginal health and housing than a half-assed referendum where no one seemed to know what was going on? You had divided voices between Indigenous communities, and you had a vote that was it was so obvious, it was blindingly obvious that it was going to lose before it was even announced.
Mike, who's going to pick up the pieces from all this?
Well, I think Albo's damaged probably. I think his career is now, or his legacy is defined by the fact that he lost a referendum that he was so convinced that we had to vote yes, where people do have differing views, and they're entitled to.
Sure.
And if you were a yes or a no voter and you tried to ram your opinion down the throat of someone else, well, you're doing them a disservice, because everyone has a right to think it through and make their own decision. And I think it just got a little forceful in the end on both sides, and it sort of just descended into what was a mess. And then you throw the Israeli conflict in that was happening during the latter stages of last week, and when the final sales pitch was happening, that was just the last nail in the coffin of a successful yes vote, because people didn't care. People were over it, and they said, "Oh, look, and if I don't care, I'll probably vote no." And I think that's the way it transpired.
Yes, I think there's not enough attention on cost of living matters. When I go out and about, people approach me, and guess what they talk about? You know this. How expensive things are. Who can do anything? You know, it's being able to afford the meal on the table, the new pair of shoes for the children, or pair of socks, or just being able to pay your basic bills, utilities and so on. I wonder whether we've lost sight of this, because in my travels, and you're probably in the same position, this is the thing that people are concerned about. They're barely making ends meet with basics.
And you see your petrol prices go up.
Oh.
I saw, because of the Middle Eastern conflict,
Yep.
you see your supermarket bill go up,
Yes.
definitely.
Yep.
And as you are struggling to make ends meet, and I've noticed, and I'm sure you have, and the listeners have as well, that your day-to-day costs are going up, and you're noticing it, and you're noticing it in a big way. And then you see politicians from both sides jumping on a government-funded jet, taxpayer-funded jet, flying around the country selling a no-win case for 4 weeks in a row. And you think, well, they don't seem to mind spending the money themselves, but they don't seem to take into account that I'm hurting and my family is, and I have real considerable difficulties in coping with what's coming down the track.
Now, look,
and inevitably, interest rates are going to go up again.
Now, there's something else here. The latest data shows that there are 39,900 jobs full-time that have gone. That is going to bite. That is going to bite people hard.
Well, it is, especially, as I said, if interest rates go up again. And one of the reasons they'll go up is that your petrol prices are going to go up. And when they go up, so do your grocery bills, because to transport your goods to supermarkets for you to buy them costs more to do.
Yeah, well. So
when we get into that upward motion, interest rates go up again.
Yeah, the inflation rate on petrol, 14%. That's extraordinary, isn't it?
Well, if petrol prices and supermarket prices as a result of petrol prices then reflect and inflation won't go up to 14%. There'll be levers pulled to make sure that doesn't happen. But interest rates, they've been on hold, and we think we're doing well. The people out there with a mortgage are saying, oh, great relief. The interest rates didn't go up this month. Oh, well, they haven't gone down either.
No. So what is the next move? Because the feedback I get is that people are being pushed more and more to that cliff over which they don't want to fall. So is anyone going to do anything, or are we just hoping that things get better?
Well, I think that the government hopes that because whilst unemployment is still a problem, that the employment situation isn't quite as dire as it was maybe 5 years ago, that we don't just hold our breath and keep our fingers crossed every second Thursday of the month when unemployment figures come out, that will in a way keep the proper natural controls on keeping inflation at least under control. But it's the outside factors, and I'm talking where you have unrest in the Middle East and its effect on world oil prices. To me, that is, no government can predict where that's going to end and what sort of economic impact and the ripple effect around the world. And look, we've just come out of COVID, and that cost everyone dearly. And for a while it seemed all right when we were getting JobKeeper, but once that wore off and now we're paying the price of that, cost of living is through the roof.
Yeah. What do you think the biggest challenge is for our Premier, Peter Malinauskas, at the moment for South Australia?
Oh, I think all sorts of challenges. He's just come off the referendum, which was clearly a disappointment and not a good result for whether it be a federal or a state Labor government. He's now got to try and get back on the horse and get the state voice to Parliament, which is a completely different beast. We're not trying to change a constitution. We're just legislating, making new laws.
What is that going to do, by the way? I get people saying to me, what's that going to mean? Anything much?
Well, there will be various committees around the state in various regions that are set up to advise government. In some ways, it's similar. It's all has the common cause of making or closing the gap between Australia and in the rest of Australia and Indigenous Australia, First Nations people. But he's wanting to get that up and happening again in March next year. And my advice very publicly in any commentary I've done is be very careful the way you do this now, because there has been a resounding voice from Australia, and that has been no. If you try and introduce this too quickly or too radically into South Australia, and the no vote still prevails at the next election, or the sentiment of a no vote prevails at the next election, which is only a couple of years away now, it could come back and bite you pretty hard. But yes, it could help you, but chances are you'll suffer from it.
Okay, what's any good news on the horizon? Do we have any, or is it just going to be batten down the hatches, guys? Because the economy is going to be a little bit tough for a while.
Well, I think the good news out of all of this, if you look at it globally, and I say this quite seriously, if you look at it globally, we probably live in the best city in the world and in the safest country in the world. And we might be doing it tough, but, gee, you look at some of the pictures coming in from Israel and from Gaza and other areas and earthquake-ravaged areas of Afghanistan and elsewhere, and you think we are living in a bloody good place, and you wouldn't want to be anywhere else. You seriously wouldn't want to live anywhere else but Adelaide at the moment. I'll be investigating this a little bit later on today with our friends at SACOS, and that's the social services people. Great job. But my understanding is that a record number of people are now reporting asking for food. What does that tell you? Oh, and that will continue to go up. That's the cost of living pressure. Yeah. These are people, Leon, that in the past, these are people that even have jobs. They're families where they have working members of the family, but they still can't afford to feed the family. God, isn't that awful? And if that doesn't point towards a serious cliff that we're approaching, where it's not just people who are, have systemic unemployment in their family and they have too many people and not enough income. They've got the income, and how they distribute it is their business. but it still takes for an average family to go with your hand out asking for food.
Yes.
It would be your last resort. I think, not too many people would choose to do that. So I'd be very interested to hear what SACOS says. I think they would have a similar view that unless they can increase their resources, the demand on their services isn't going down anytime soon.
No.
But it's going up. There's no question of that. So it's demand is rapidly outstripping supply, and that is a real problem.
I've got a question before I let you go, talking to Mike Smithson, the wonderful commentator from Channel 7. You see him regularly on 7 News and other segments, and of course on this radio station. I want to ask you about the business of banks that keep shutting their branches. And so, especially, and this, of course, for many, if you drive a car and you've got all these other facilities and you're very mobile, it's an inconvenience, but you just call it a pest thing and you forget it. But there are lots of people who don't get to move outside where they live or very close to where they live, who, if their bank branch is gone, what the hell do they do?
Oh, well, that's it. If they don't have a car, if they don't have
a lot of people in that position.
Oh, there are.
Yeah.
There are people that the bank was the one thing they knew would always be there. A bit like the post office that would always be there, and they're a little bit of a dying breed as well. But it causes enormous problems and stress for people that do like face-to-face banking. And I had an occasion where I wanted to close an account that I had. And I went to the local branch and it was an ANZ bank, and I thought, I'll get there, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I walked in the door of the branch. There was one teller, and there would have been probably 20 people in front of me.
You know something else?
Thought,
yeah.
And I thought, I'm not going to stand here. And I had to close this account because it was the last day of the financial year.
Yeah.
And I thought, gee, I'm in trouble here because I thought this would be a lot easier than it is. Anyway, telephone banking, I got through to someone and I thought, well, are you able to do this on the phone? Well, apparently I could, and I did. But I think it's bank staff that are then subjected to abuse from customers potentially because there are not enough tellers in branches. Then people walk away from banking. Yeah, I would say another 5 years you won't even find a bank.
Well, I'll tell you a funny story. I had something to do with a financial institution recently. It was a bank. And I went in there and none of the people in the bank, including the branch manager, could do anything. I had to sit in a private room with a phone and talk to somebody in a call centre. Yep. And that, I finally got things done. And I finished the call and I went out to the attendant and I said, what's going on here? And they said, well, this is the way we're moving. I said, well, what does that mean for you? Because if you can't help me and I've come to a brunch to have a face-to-face conversation, what am I supposed to do? You're almost cut out of the equation. And they said, that's where things are going. I reckon, Mike, my instinct is we need to review some of the rules here because I think banks are I understand that they've got to make money and all that sort of stuff and they're shareholders and consumers, but, they're also a service and we have to make sure we get service for God's sake, don't we?
Well, the thing is, Leon, you look at most banks, whether the big four of them or others, they lease premises and that's where you go in to do your banking and it's quite a big office space and there are all sorts of resources within there. Now, clearly, they make big money. You just look at a bank's profit each year. They want to make more money for their shareholders and for themselves. Well, of course they're going to close branches because that saves them money. It's a lot cheaper to do it on a telephone in a call centre.
Yes.
So it's a case of easing the customer into it so there's not a customer revolt. But eventually, as in your situation and certainly in my recent situation, I thought, I can't be bothered with going to a bank branch. It's too hard. That's what they want you to think.
Of course. Then they say, but people are not coming in, so let's close the branch.
Exactly.
Yeah. What's the answer to this, mate? I just think we need to rewrite the finance regulations because we've forgotten the meaning of the word service, haven't we? Oh,
sure, but banks will always find loopholes out of that. they'll say it on economic grounds. It's just not a viable branch to keep open, or we don't have staff resources and people come in and abuse our staff.
Jeez.
Face to face. We're getting, people are walking off the job, or a bank robber comes in and holds them up.
So
can't do that over the phone.
What are they then expecting us to do? They don't want us to go to their branch. They're shutting ATMs, closing many of them down. What are we supposed to do? Because
it's online internet banking. As long as you don't get hacked, you're fine. But that's now another problem.
Yes.
And you're warned to be very careful the way you transact online. Well, if that's the only way you can do it, you don't have too many safeguards, and that is another problem of the future. I'm not trying to be doom and gloom.
Oh no! This is exactly
the realities.
Callers are telling me this, Mike. You're just telling me and everybody else what people are saying and what they're facing. My instinct says rewrite some of the rules here, because we need to get some basic services from banks. We really do. And this business where they push you to a hole in the wall and then they reduce the number of walls in which there are holes, I think we can do better than that, seriously. Especially pensioners and those that are not as mobile. I fear for them and what they've got to go through.
Sure, yeah. And my heart goes out to them as well.
Yeah. Mike, good to talk to you, and we'll keep... you're the man that we will often see on 7, and you do a brilliant job, and thank you for your counsel today. Great
stuff. Thanks, Leon. Really enjoyed it.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Mike Smithson, and Smitho is a good operator, and we've got... Coming up, for example, have a listen to what we've got today. You won't want to miss any of this. A third of the bank branches have shut in the past 5 years. They're still shutting more. Then, of course, there's... try this on. Chemicals found in popular candy... That's the American term, but it's sweets. It's what's in black licorice. Now, I haven't had licorice for ages. I know some people who have some people have this thing where I've got to have this, But there's a study on mice. They always use mice for this. But the flavour in licorice is a herb used in Chinese medicine that kills pancreatic cancer. Now, that doesn't mean that you go out and gorge yourself with licorice, but isn't that interesting? This is from Hong Kong research, that the compound could make treatments like chemotherapy more effective. I can just see it now. You go into the doctor's rooms and they say, look, we're going to give you some chemo. Here's some licorice. Try this. A lot of people love licorice, though. And the 11 to 13% of your cells, that's yours and mine, will respond quickly to this sort of therapy. Isn't it amazing that things we thought were just a sweet you have when you feel got a bit of a sweet tooth actually have a medicinal use for us? Look, there's so much more to come this morning, and I'll give you our text number, because I know sometimes people think, I must contact Leon and tell him this. It's 0419 65 68 60. That's 0419 65 68 60, and we'll be very happy to acknowledge whatever it is you're saying or you're asking. Back shortly.
You are tuned into the Court of Public Opinion with Leon Byner.
Everybody's voting for the friendly voice of radio, the people's choice. Music, weather, sports, and news, it's radio. The people choose. Everybody swinging to the swinging voice of radio, the people's choice. Big fry, small fry, dawn to dawn, it's radio that turns them on. Swinging, singing. A million sounds you want to hear. It's a landslide every year. Everybody's dialing in the smiling voice of radio, the people's choice. East Coast, West Coast, in between, it's radio that makes us see.
We often hear the term welcome to country. I would love to know what this means to you. Now, I understand that sometimes symbols have a very important role to play in our community. But a lot of people say to me, Leon, can you explain to me why we welcome ourselves to where we already live? And I said, well, it's just a tradition. But they kind of think it defies a degree of logic. So I wouldn't mind your opinion on this. I don't think it's necessarily a disrespect at all to ditch it. I mean, it's got a place, obviously. But when you live somewhere, you don't want to be welcoming to your own house. Okay, Kath, good morning. Good to talk to you.
Oh, good morning. I tuned in rather late and I thought, oh, that's not Jeremy, that's Leon.
Yeah, Jez has got a bit of a lurgy today, so he called me and no, he'll be good. He'll recover. So he hasn't got much of a voice at the moment. So I'm here.
That's good. But I've got to tell you that in this world today, there's not many people who have working brains, and I believe that Jeremy, Mike Smithson, and yourself are three of the people who still have working brains. So thank you for taking over.
Well, not at all. I think, what's your experience when you go into the bank? Do you have long queues, or is it that they send you to a telephone? I got sent to a phone the other day. Oh, we can't help you here. You'll have to ring this number. I said, well, what am I here for?
That's happened to me. I'm Bank SA, and I went to Victor Harbour branch because I live at Yankalua because the one in Yank is closed.
Yes.
And I thought, what is happening? It's just crazy.
What's the nearest bank branch to you where you can access when you've got to go there? Is it a few kilometres away? And, of course, that's the other thing. If you drive...
it's more than that.
Is it?
I'm in Yankalilla and I have to go to Victor Harbour.
Goodness.
So it's a 40-minute drive.
What if you didn't have a car?
Yes. And what if you're I'm 80.
Yeah.
I hate that, HO. I'm 80, but the older people that, don't drive or...
Sure.
It's very difficult for them.
Yeah, so you see, this is the other thing now, and correct me if I'm wrong. If your journeys to the bank that you've got are limited for all sorts of very reasonable reasons, that means you've got to take out cash, and you've got to keep it somewhere, which a lot of people don't like doing. Or, of course, it's argued, you can use a card, but a lot of people don't like to do that. So what do you do? Do you go out and get, I've got this bill and this bill and this bill, and take a whole lot of cash and then hide it somewhere in your home? Is that what you do?
No, don't do that. I use my phone banking.
Yep.
And if I want cash, I go from Yankalua to Normanville, which is a 10-minute drive.
Yep.
And the post office there, I can get cash out there.
Yeah, thank God for Australia Post.
Oh, thank God for them.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you so much.
Kathy, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much for calling in. Look,
you're welcome. You're very much missed on radio.
Yeah, I get told that. Well, I'm doing this, so thank you for your kind thoughts. It's lovely to hear from
welcome.
you. My name's...
You have a good day.
I will. I'm Leon Byner, and I'm here to talk to you about anything that you need. And remember, because I've been around in my business now for a long time, I do know people who know people, and it's always my privilege and pleasure that when somebody's in a spot of bother and they're not quite sure what to do, I'm always in a position 9 times out of 10 to be able to say, hey, here is the person I can recommend you to. My black book's in my head, and it's a big one. Now, look, there's a couple of things here that are items that I reckon are not out in the general media, but they should be. Now, again, I told you about this pancreatic cancer study where, and this is important because I tell you what, the doctor, I have a GP who's absolutely brilliant, and he was saying to me that this is an increasing issue. But the old bill licorice every now and again doesn't go astray. It's got medicinal value. Hi, Maria. Good to talk to you.
Yes, likewise, Leon. Nice to have you on the airways again.
Thank you.
Well, in regards to banks, they have a duty of care, and I feel it's an essential service.
Yes.
Banks have been there for years, and all of us knew our manager, the staff, they knew us. So they couldn't, or we couldn't be scammed. The ID was confirmed.
Yep.
We had a nice chat and we got what we needed. In this digital economy, it must be fee and charges free. They want this, so, and also we should have a tax deductible. Oh, wait a minute, put my teeth back in my mouth.
Tax deductible, yeah, that's fine. Know what you mean. Fine. Yeah.
For laptops, printers, all the software for antivirus to safeguard our asset, which is our money. And further, for the people in the country that have to travel 50 kilometres, 100 kilometres, the car trip, the petrol, the service should all be tax deductible. And we have to scream loud and long, you know, so we can keep our service. Not all of us want to come into this magical digital world that scams us left, right and centre.
Yeah.
Now, in regards to the S23, they said they wanted us to be educated and educate ourselves.
Yeah.
But like Jeremy at Norwood asking the girls why they were handing out yes pamphlets, and the answer was the right thing to do. Well, when I went to vote, working my way through a half a dozen yes volunteer pamphlet hand-outers, I asked them, do you know the name of the traditional owners of the land which you stand upon today? And it was like the deer in the headlights. They just stared at me dumbfounded, quickly fumbling for their phone to Google the answer. Well, wouldn't you know they would have educated themselves to know what land they were on?
Yes. I think you've hit an interesting point, Maria. I think sometimes we get bogged down or constipated with procedures and these sorts of issues when really they're not the most important thing.
No,
but they become the most important thing.
They get swept up in the drama and the emotion, and instead of looking and researching from A to Z as you and I do, all this nastiness and everything has set us back for ages now. What we should do with all the elites and the Prime Minister and the 250 delegates of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, they are Gonski, and we start afresh. Do not call us uneducated, stupid, and that word, heads, from very upper-class people. Well, we have given you the answer. It's a definite no, and we do recognise you. We do sympathise with you, but governments have let the communities down. The money is funneled into the elites and not where it's required. Now, the senators that are trying to work for their community, they are getting knocked back in Parliament. And it disgusts me that Parliament as a whole is knocking back inquiries or maybe not an inquiry because we know what's wrong in the communities, is boots on the ground and fix it now.
Maria, good to talk to you. You always have good, forthright issues. That's fantastic. By the way, I'll give you my phone number, and it's always good to hear from you. Remember that sometimes you think, my opinion doesn't matter. Never think that. My experience over years of being in public life is that if there's something that you need or there's a viewpoint, don't be afraid to say it, because your view or your issue is probably touching hundreds or possibly thousands of other people. So don't be afraid to call in and say your piece. That's what it's all about. 0491 65 6860.
Saint San Joaquin, and I just as soon right now pull on over to the side of the road and show you what I mean. La da 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 da. La da 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 da. July, you're a woman more than any woman I've ever known. July, you're a woman more than any woman I've ever known. July, you're my woman more than any woman I've ever known.
You are tuned into the Court of Public Opinion with Leon Byner.
Phil Seymour, what a great song. Gee, being a music person, which I was for most of the time in the media, you love those songs, especially if you haven't heard them for a while. My phone or text number, in case you want to communicate with us, and don't be afraid to do so, is 0491 656860. And it's easy. Now, let's talk to another caller. Good morning, it's Leon.
Yeah, Leon, it's Peter Clayton.
Good to talk to you.
Look, I just, as you know, I helped Jeremy with his Facebook posts.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to talk about, I guess, censorship. You know, we've been doing this for a couple of years, and yesterday we did a post that we tacked on the end of it a story about Hamas, and lo and behold, an hour later, I got a message from Facebook to say that the post had been deleted because of hate speech.
Now, let me ask you, this post about Hamas, was it something that they had said that you'd posted, or was it some sort of opinion as to what Hamas was doing?
Yeah, basically, it was just a 26 thing that was sent to Jeremy from a friend talking about the situation. I mean, but what we've found over the last, couple of years that we've been doing the Facebook is the censorship is just, it's out of hand. Well, for instance, as you know, Jeremy lost his job because he gave an opinion. And it just seems like if you're not in line with what the media wants you to be in line with.
It's called groupthink. Yeah, this groupthink. You've just got to be so careful now. Yeah. I tell you what, I've been in public life in radio and to some degree TV for quite a long time. Gee, things have changed. They really have. You've got to be so careful because it's easy to offend somebody, and when people get offended, they're not, in some cases, happy to leave it at that. They'll want to take it further and get you into trouble and have you censured. So you've got to be very careful. It's the kind of world we live in. It's a bit sad because it is censorship. It is.
It is. Look, I was before I retired, I was a travel consultant, and I've travelled all around the world. And, you know, when you travel around the world, you know that we're all the same everywhere. I don't hate Palestinians.
No.
I don't hate people from the Middle East. Personally, I don't like the religion. But that's my opinion. But people are the same. But we have to be able to talk about this Middle East situation.
Yes.
And you have to put yourself in the position of what Israel has seen, what has happened in that what was 10, 12 days ago. It was the most horrendous attack.
Yes.
The media can't be censored from talking about that.
No. You know, the thing that disappoints me is that there seems to be an increase in anti-Semitism. And
yes.
I just think that's sad, because we live in a country where your beliefs, whatever religion, or even if it's complete atheism or whatever it is, used to be respected. But now, if you say anything publicly about your beliefs, someone will want to censor you for it. It's sad. It really is.
Well, yeah, it is. And, you know, with the voice thing, I actually volunteered to hand out the vote no cards locally. And it seemed to me, the impression I got was the yes voters were angry. They were just angry, you know, and I was called a Luddite by one. But anyway, they are just so fixed on their idea. They don't want to hear anyone else's idea.
You know, I've grown to believe that to be able to agree to disagree is one of the good things about democracy. And, you know, people have a right to have an opinion, but nowadays you dare not express it in certain venues, because if you do, you get a pile-on against you. That's unfair. It's wrong.
Yeah,
because
look, I had a friend come, a friend of a friend come in, and we were talking about the voice. He was a young kid, and very much a yes voter. So I said, look, I went over to where I had a copy of the executive order. I'm sure you're familiar with it, for the NIAA.
Yeah.
The executive order signed in July 2019, I think, signed by Scott Morrison and the Governor-General, Sir Peter Cosgrove. So I handed this to this kid and I said, read this. This is a voice to Parliament that was established by executive order. He didn't want to know about it.
Yeah.
Just didn't want to know about it.
Well, there are politicians in our Parliament on both sides who actually you can talk to. I mean, there are quite a few. When I was doing regular spots on radio, I'd be referring people to them all the time. There's still a good thing that if you've got an issue, don't hesitate to talk to your local member, because more often than not, you'll get something done, and they're good people to use, be it state or federal. But I just think that we've got to give people faith, not in a religious sense, that if they've got a grievance or there's an issue that's affecting them and it's not right, that they can get it fixed without going through a whole lot of constipative gobbledygook.
Yes. Have you talked to Jacinta Price at all, Leon?
I'm going to. She's a good lady. She's a good lady.
Yeah. Look, I went to 2 of her seminars, and the first one I got to meet her, and I just gave her a hug and said, "Look, you are a beautiful human being."
Yeah.
You know, and she is an amazing woman. I was talking to Jeremy about Jacinta, and he's a fan, of course. And I said, "Look, I'd like to see her as Prime Minister of this country," and he thought she's too young. But what a great unification that would be.
Well,
she's intelligent, articulate, and she's part Aboriginal and female.
The fact that she's there and she's got a great profile and she's highly respected by all sides is a very good thing. And whilst one can say, look, maybe she should be PM, and you could argue that very well, the fact that she's there in a representative sense already as an MP is fantastic. And I just say more power to her and her kind. That is, people who aspire to do things, but they want to take the next step and actually be part of solving the problems. I think that's a great thing. I really do.
It is.
Good to talk to you, my friend. Good to talk to you. Yeah, look, if you want to have a chat, and I'm very open to a lot of different ideas, 0491 656860. Don't hesitate to call, because your opinion actually matters. Can I just share a couple of things here which have been around and commented on by people who've contacted me regularly? Aboriginal Australians are saying that there's been an explosion in box tickers claiming to be Indigenous to steal scholarships and job opportunities. Now, this is the quote. I'm reading you verbatim. More Australians are falsely claiming to be Aboriginal to cash in on benefits. And there's a lot of people saying this. Well, you know what? Maybe, and it shouldn't be the case that you've got to prove your ethnicity. But I don't see any other way around it. And if you think there's another way, hey, give me a call or text me, 0491 656860, because, we want to help people who are strugglers, irrespective of race, creed or colour. That's what it's about. And I still, I suppose naively for some, subscribe to the view that civility costs nothing, absolutely nothing. So we're very happy to hear from you on any issue that you want to talk about. And there's lots of things happening. I didn't realise, I've had some interesting feedback about licorice. Do you know anybody that's got a thing for licorice? Many of us have. I love cheese, for example.
Dentists love it.
Yeah, dentists love it, that's true. But I'm a big lover of cheese. I don't know why, but most kinds I do enjoy. But a chemical found in the licorice can actually be, and this is from a study on mice, we always use mice for these things, treatments like chemotherapy are more effective. I can just see somebody going into a doctor's surgery now and I'll say, look, here's a piece of licorice, we're about to give you chemo, which is not the easiest thing in the world to have. I'm lucky I've never had to have it, but I know people who have, and gee, everything falls out, starting from your hair. So one would hope that over time science can find more creative ways to deal with these sorts of issues rather than... Because the problem with chemo is, as effective as it might be for many, it kills so many of the good cells as well as the bad ones. My late dad, he had lymphoma, which is a disorder of the blood. And when he told me he was going to have chemo, I thought, oh dear. And of course, first thing that happened, his hair fell out. And that had a big impact on his psychology because he thought, oh, I'm losing my hair. I said, well, Daddy, I went and bought him a hat. And he got so used to it because everybody commented how good it was that he almost wore it to bed. Not quite, but nearly. So sometimes there can be a positive. But that was something that I really remember, as one would reasonably expect when somebody close to you is going through this. Now, look, I've got to tell you, there are lots of interesting things going on around the world at the moment. And we are very happy to talk to you about any issue you want to raise, all right? This is something that's... and I want to talk just briefly about aged care because we are an ageing nation and more of us are going to need it. But 23 aged care facilities have closed because they're unable to conform to the government's reforms to the sector. Now, Wesley Mission... they're a wonderful group. They've been very vocal about the decision to close their Sydney homes, and they won't be the last, let me tell you. It will spread elsewhere. And they've said that difficulty in attracting and retaining staff to meet the government's minimum care requirements, which include 24/7 mandatory registered nurses. So the Minister for Aged Care says, that's Anika Wells, more beds have opened than closed. Well, but then the demand has also gone up. I wish some of these politicians who represent us could be a little bit more helpful rather than just coming up with lines written by somebody who just left uni, because that's what happens 9 times out of 10, trust me. Now, I've had a lot of feedback this morning on 0491 656860 about this pancreatic cancer study that I've told you about. So I better repeat it, and that is that a study on mice found that a chemical in licorice root that is, is used in Chinese medicine that has a very helpful use in getting rid of, not completely, but helping, pancreatic cancer. And I know some people that have had this, and it's a deadly sickness, that one. Deadly sickness. And I was talking to a doctor about this stuff the other day, and he said people have got to just make sure they have enough fibre in their diet. And I said, is it really as simple as that? And he said, well, to a large extent, yes. There can be other factors, and it could even be genetic. But he made the point to me that fibre is very good to brush up against the insides and clean them. That's the polite way of putting them. So I just thought I'd share that with you. Now, another lady that I have a lot of time for is Jacinta Nampijinpa Price. She's a wonderful Australian. And I wouldn't mind getting your opinion on this, because we do a lot of things symbolically that, frankly, are an excuse not to do much else. I'd rather ditch the symbolism and have action, call for action, to do things. So she's a wonderful lady. And she says we should ditch the welcome to country because, frankly, it is just something that is done for the sake of doing it. And it might actually give people an excuse to say, well, I've done my bit. I've done the welcome to country. I don't need to do any more. And believe it or not, there are some people who think like that, which is amazing, isn't it? And I reckon Jacinta is a damn good people's representative. I think she makes some real sense. So good on you, Jacinta. You're a wonderful lady. In fact, we'll probably put her on the show soon because she's got some very good ideas. Very good ideas. Now, let me just remind you that this program belongs to you. So you can either ring, I love talking with you about anything you want to raise or have an opinion or a question or an observation, or you can text us 0491 6568 60. Back soon.
You're listening to the Court of Public Opinion with Leon Byner, where the time is 10 a.m.
Hey! What's the weather for the weekend gonna be? Will it be hot, cold, rain, snow?
And the weather today in Adelaide, it will be mostly sunny.
You may not find us on your TV, because in case you did not know...
Hello?
Bruce Mountain,
yes.
Leon Byner, how are you?
Oh, good day, Leon. I'm fine, thank you, and you?
I'm excellent. Now, Bruce, I've got to first of all compliment you. You're at the Victorian Energy Policy Centre, and if there's anything that you know about energy, what you don't know, you could put on a piece of confetti. So I thank you very much for being on this morning. Now,
no, Leon, that's very kind of you. I wish I actually felt that way. I feel daunted by the millions of things I don't know.
Look, you can always learn stuff, but your information is absolutely fantastic. Now, first of all, I want you to tell everybody, where do we stand with the cost of energy? Because I'm getting feedback that it's about to go up again. Is that so?
Yes, I've been hearing similar things. So let me give you a brief overview of what's happening in the different markets. In the prompt market, the spot market as it's called, which is the 5-minute market, prices are set every 5 minutes. Those have moved down very strongly over the last 6 months to the point now that they are negative for large parts of most days of the week. And their average prices are really low in most parts of the national electricity market. And that's as a consequence of expanding solar production in particular, but also wind and much weaker coal prices. And the short-term traded gas price, which is often an indicator of the marginal price of gas when the gas-fired plant runs, it is not low, but it's much lower than it was. So bringing those factors together, less gas running, less coal running, and the coal and more wind and solar, the short-run spot market prices have moved down strongly. We're not seeing the same decline yet in the contract prices and the contract market, which hedges those spot prices. That lags the spot market and has an uncertain linkage to it, but they haven't moved down as strongly yet, but they are well off their peaks. In spite of that, I hear people saying, well, we're worried about prices going up in the future, but that's not what we're seeing in the fundamentals of the market. Now, if coal prices move up strongly again, if gas prices move up strongly again, which will be linked to international events, upturn in the economy, Chinese economy surging off, more war in Europe, then we could well end up in the same situation that we were roughly 15 months ago of these incredibly high spot prices. And if our coal generators collapse, they're still necessary in the evenings and the peaks and for large parts of the day in Queensland. If they collapse or have problems, then we're going to have shortages and prices are going to rise again in the spot market.
I've got to get your opinion on this. There's a lobby out there that wants to get rid of coal. They want to get rid of it. Now, I know we export billions of dollars worth, but if we do that, isn't that going to sentence the consumer to much higher energy prices?
So it's difficult to give a categorical answer on this. Coal, which is a thermal generation technology, it boils a cauldron of water which creates steam, is an inflexible technology because those boilers are inflexible. They take a long time to heat up and cool down, and the energy they contain is their steam. And you can let that steam run out very quickly. You can exhaust it. You can use it to just spin it, so it can be flexible, but in a very small range. That does not go well with wind and solar, which produce when the wind is there and the sun is there, which it turns out we can forecast incredibly accurately. So we can know with certainty at a day ahead, an hour ahead, even a few days ahead, what is very likely to be the production from wind and solar in different 5 minutes in most parts of our market. But it is nonetheless variable. And the wind can drop off quickly and the sun can drop off very quickly. And so it goes up and down. And so you have to have a generation mix that complements that in order to get the advantage of the cheap wind and solar. And that means hydro, open cycle gas generation and batteries. And so it's the combination of those things plus the wind and solar, which is where our technology mix is heading.
So tell me, question is, have we got it right?
No. I think there are many things that we haven't got right. We're in a transition, and there's a great deal of learning going on. I think our big failures have always been government and regulation, much less the technology or the adoption in the markets. It's been governments who struggle to cope with the change and struggle to lead it. And I think in many respects they haven't accorded energy the serious attention that it really should have.
I've got a question. A lot of people ask me to ask you this. I'm talking with Professor Bruce Mountain from the Victorian Energy Policy Centre. In terms of globally, are our energy prices, once upon a time they used to be very low, but they're going up, aren't they? We are now becoming a lot more expensive. Is that not the case?
So until kind of early 90s, globally, Australia had amongst the cheapest electricity prices in the context in which government commissions ran a lot of that production. They organised themselves well. They took advantage of coal as a dominant energy resource, which the technology was suitable for the time. After we privatised and restructured, prices went up hugely, mostly at first because of these ridiculous network regulation, which has not improved and has created a dead weight, but also because retail markets have not, certainly for small...
These, just when you talk about network regulations, these are the poles and wires. What's happened there? Yeah. Just explain that for us, if you could.
So there are many errors. The biggest or the earliest one was really governments themselves wanting to maximise the proceeds from the sale of those networks to the private sector. And so they pumped up the asset value of those, and they guaranteed the future owners revenues, which are going to cover the higher costs. And so that turned out into more proceeds from the sale of them to those investors. And that's a public policy thing, because that money went back into the state government treasury, and then they used it to do the things that government do. So it's pro and con. But make no mistake, the first major error from an electricity cost point of view was the decision to pump up the asset price. The next decision was incredibly captured regulation of the network businesses, where essentially they were allowed to spend like crazy, and they had an incentive to spend because the allowed rates of return were much greater than what it cost them to actually finance. So the easiest way to build up your profits is to build up your asset base, which is pretty much the opposite of what you see in markets that work well, where competition drives down the investment so that you get the maximum return from the investment. And I'm afraid that hasn't been fixed. There's no end of regulatory document that's produced to not try and deal with it, but that's how the regulatory process works. But they have not fixed it, and as a consequence, we have these very high network prices.
I'm talking with Professor Bruce Mountain from the Victorian Energy Policy Centre. Bruce, what proportion of Australians have got solar and batteries?
So roughly 1 in 3, a little bit more than 1 in 3 as an average, but when you dig into it, it's even higher proportion than that, because only around 2/3 of our dwellings are capable of hosting solar. So they're not in multi-unit dwellings with limited roof space and so on. So it's somewhere between 1 in 2 and 1 in 3.
Okay. And generally speaking, would you encourage people to do it if they're able to? It's whether, of course, you've got an ownership of your own roof, but all things being equal, is that something you recommend?
Yes, without a doubt. And I think, households have done that. They've had to invest themselves, so they've had to draw money from their savings or from their mortgages or whatever.
Sure.
So, but nonetheless, it's paid for itself, and it's been an escape that many customers could take advantage of. It's had a shared benefit, because exactly the same price reductions we were talking about earlier, a lot of that has come about as a consequence of the export of surplus solar, which then drives down effectively the demand and brings prices down for all customers. So it's a shared benefit, but it's a particular benefit which households that invest themselves are able to capture.
What's the situation with gas at the moment? Because Australia has a stack of it and we export a lot. Is it doing much for us? I mean, does the export of this mean that consumers pay less?
No, the export of it means that they pay more, because it's dragged our price up to the price at which customers abroad are willing to pay. So our gas companies say, why sell at a discount here when we can get a higher price abroad? And although it's said we have heaps of gas, it turns out we don't. It turns out that actually there's a scarcity. If there wasn't a scarcity, we could meet the export demand and have plenty to sell in the local market. But it turns out that the combination of concentrated supply and scarcity, which is that the Queensland coal seam gas didn't turn out to be anywhere near as good as they thought it would be, means that gas is scarce and the gas producers can price up to the equivalent export price.
Goodness gracious. The Deakin University, Samantha Hepburn is one of the people that talks about this, and I know you're aware of her. She argues that we should have a a local policy that reserves a certain amount of our resources for local use. A lot of other countries do it. Qatar certainly do. Why don't we? Why won't we protect our locals?
So this is one of these vexed public policy problems.
Yeah.
In energy, we need to see it in the rest of the economy. From an international trade point of view, it's often thought of, this sort of policy is often thought of as putting rocks in your own harbour. If you cut off access to international markets, either import or export, to drive an agenda locally, you can actually undermine your own best interest. So the argument is, if we don't access the international markets, we utilise the gas locally, there'll be cheaper gas supply locally. That'll be in the interests of consumers and in the interests of industry.
But can't we reserve some for ourselves, though? I mean, surely if it's already under our feet, surely we can take a share of that, can't we?
Well, it's a non-issue if you've got plentiful gas supply. So think of it this way. If we had this huge gas resource, and the government says, look, the gas markets are not working terribly well, it's very concentrated, there's this huge resource, and we know if we leave it to these gas suppliers, they will simply get as much profit as they can, and they will withhold supply into the local market. And so we're going to pass a law that says you guys have to sell into the local market, and so you make the sale to the local market stronger, prices come down. That's fine if you've got plentiful supply. But if you don't have plentiful supply, then you're trading off international sale, a trade, to other customers, to trade to your own. And you are losing excise and tax on the income, tax on the benefits, the growth of export industries, blah, 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 blah. So you have to trade these things off, and you have to trade them off being mindful of the economic consequence of cheaper gas for your local consumers, and you have to trade them off being mindful of what benefit the community gets from the export sale of that. So what are they getting in profits on the sale? What are they getting in excise, in duties, in infrastructure investment, in international investment, in job creation, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm not saying the government's done these sums correctly. They're hard sums to do at the best of times, but there is a problem in scarcity. I do believe across the south and eastern states, not true in the west, but across the south and eastern states, we have a scarcity in relation to the demand that we can sell internationally and locally, and that brings these issues into focus. So there is no certain and easier answer. You can argue one way or t'other, but those are political preferences.
All right, a lot of listeners want to know this, and that is it inevitable that electricity prices, energy prices are going to go up?
No.
It's not?
No.
That's good news.
Yeah. We are moving to a different energy future, but the innovation and the technology development that we see is tremendously exciting. We can now, by investing adroitly, managing your own affairs well, we can now drastically decrease the cost of energy for heating, lighting our homes, as well as our cars. Not perhaps all of our car use, but most of our car use.
Yeah.
So these things exist, and they exist because of the fundamental technology properties, not because of a commercial arrangement or a policy or a sleight of hand. So the issue is expanding that out to the whole community. And there's nothing, I can't see an argument, a technical reason why it's impossible to not have a much cheaper future, but it does require good policy, good governance, good economic regulation, and that's possible. I'm not saying it's certain, but it is possible.
So the question is, how does South Australia fare in all this? Are we in a good place, or are we very expensive compared to other states for the same thing?
Retail electricity prices in South Australia have long been extraordinarily high. It's got high network charges, which I think is the economic issue that I spoke of earlier, that price controls are not well set. There is a underlying policy problem in South Australia, and it comes back again to when they privatised. They countenanced oligopoly when they privatised as a way of maximising the proceeds. And so government after government has effectively been loath to move in strongly and deal with the oligopoly because they see it as counter to the promises they made when they implicitly privatised, or counter to the implicit promises they made when they privatised. But South Australia has been proactive right from the Rand governments onwards in taking advantage of the national subsidies for expansion of wind and solar. So disproportionately more of the national dollar has gone for the benefit of South Australians who've taken to wind and solar quicker than the others. So that's always been to their advantage. They've been at a disadvantage historically because brown coal in South Australia is not close to the load. And it wasn't a good resource like we have in Victoria. It needed to be mined and trained and what have you, all of which added to the cost. And South Australia, with Santos as its kind of state champion, has an oligopoly in gas supply, which plays badly in electricity production in South Australia. Gas, luckily, is an ever smaller proportion of the South Australian energy mix, so that problem, I think, will decline over time. But so it's like there's plenty of good and bad in SA.
Yeah. So do you still recommend solar and batteries if you can do it?
Yes, indeed.
And how much can that save you, the average consumer? Because I know you do the numbers on this, just to give people an idea.
Look, it'll vary greatly from one customer to the next.
Sure.
And the battery plus solar thing is an altogether thing, change to the solar. In round numbers, a typical household can expect to be $500 per year better off by installing solar, perhaps more in some cases. But it's unlikely you're going to get less of a benefit than $500 each year.
One question, and listeners often ask me this. I've got a few questions that have been sent to me by text 0491 656860, and that's this. And they want to know, we used to be a very cheap place for energy. Are we now very much at the top? And if so, why?
As I was saying earlier, Leon, used to be cheap.
Yeah.
In 2016, 2018 was at the very top, more expensive than Denmark. International events, as we know, the war and the consequential gas impact has moved European prices higher, although they're coming down again.
Sure.
So I don't know where South Australia is, and the exchange rate differences affect the comparisons that you make depending the way you normalise for that. But South Australia is still very dear. Most of Australia is still very dear, which explains, at least in part, why rooftop solar carries on going up.
Generally, what's your advice to people if they want to save on energy, apart from the obvious as use less?
Apart from use less, you try to make your own energy production, rooftop solar.
Yes.
And shift out of gas. Frankly, drop your gas supply. Often there's an investment involved in doing that, and it can be a bit of an onerous one, but the economics stacks up.
Bruce, thank you very much for joining us. You're always full of great information. That's Bruce Mountain, Professor Bruce Mountain from the Victorian Energy Policy Centre. And I'm just interested to know, and I have no vested interest in this, apart from the fact that I've got my own solar at home. Best thing I ever did when I set it up about 10 years ago, because I've looked at the bills, and my neighbour, unfortunately, she's on a pension and she's been saving for solar, so she'll be very relieved that she'll be able to put it on her roof soon. But her bills have been just horrendous. She's had to go on a hardship payment plan. Isn't that terrible? I wonder how many people out there. In fact, if you're on one of these hardship plans, it would be good and educative to tell people what's involved and what you get out of being on it. Because you're contracted, as far as I know. I'd be very interested to hear from you, because isn't it sad that a PowerPoint has become a status symbol? Isn't it sad? 0491 65 656860. Love to hear from you because, you can't do without electricity. Can't do without it. And, of course, we've had blackouts. Touch wood, hopefully no more. But, when you've got no electricity and you've got limited gas and maybe you use it for cooking, well, you got to bring out the storm lanterns or those new batteries you can get that give you plenty of light and they last a while. Remember, you can call us on 0491 656860 on any issue you want to raise. We've still got a lot of interesting things to run by you this morning. And I also am interested in talking a bit about aged care. If you've got elderly parents or grandparents and you've been inquiring as to how to get them into aged care, there are two things that I keep hearing about, and if you wish to add to them, please do, because this is a very important situation. Now, look, you always want to stay in your own home if you can. I get that. Of course you do. But there comes a time when maybe, all things being equal, it could be distance, it could be other things that you think, gee, as reluctantly as we want to do it, the aged care is really the only option left. I'd love to know how your family or grandparents or relatives have coped in making that switch from living in their own place to an aged care facility. I'm sure, and I know this because I've met so many people with this issue, they would rather be in their own home and have some sort of support. If you can get support at home, that's fantastic because it's very comforting when you can be in your own environment and have your own pets and those sorts of things. So I'd love to hear from you, 0491 656860. Very happy to hear from you on this issue. Because aged care, as we become an ageing nation, and we've been that way for a while, it's a very big issue for a lot of people. And there's another issue here. I mentioned earlier today, and I've had a bit of feedback on this, that Aboriginal Australians have been saying that there's been an explosion in box tickers claiming to be Indigenous and steal scholarships and job opportunities. But that's not the only thing. And so how the hell do you prove your ethnic roots? Because it won't necessarily be in your passport. What do? You go somewhere and present your birth certificate? Because, look, it's always been the case that if there's money in something, people will try and conform to the rules and regulations where they can get the benefit. But what we don't want to do is not help those people who are genuine, and there are many who are. So I just wonder whether the guidelines and parameters and circumstances from which you can claim a benefit need to be tightened, or whether or not they're okay as they are. That's another issue that we're very happy to talk about today. I'm Leon Byner. I'm here for Jeremy Cordeaux, and Jezza, he's lost his voice. Not a good thing when you happen to be doing radio, but he'll get better. He's nursing himself back to health, which is fantastic. By the way, a couple of other things that I'll mention with you, and that is that I've had a lot of feedback, people asking me about how good are solar panels. And I've got no interest in them, except that I use them myself. I'm not connected to anybody that flogs them. I have no financial arrangement with anybody. But all I can say is if you've got a few spare dollars and you want to save on energy, between now and March, April next year is the time when solar comes into its own, because you can get an app. In fact, when you've got solar, you can get an app on your phone and you can actually track your energy use. And see, the good thing is, and I've got a friend and she's smart, she's a pensioner. She's got solar and she does all her heavy lifting in terms of using electricity during the day so that she's not using the grid. And then she can relax after hours because she's done all the stuff that's very energy consuming, which is pretty amazing. So that's the smart way to go, is to do all the work as quickly as you can. Now, we're going to talk soon to Bob Gottliebsen. And Bob is a fantastic economist, and he's got some interesting things which I know we can share with you. And remember, if you've got an observation to make on something, or you want a subject, you say, Leon, you should be talking about this. Hey, 0491 656860.
86 proof and smiles are all synthetic, and the ulcers never stop. When they take that final inventory, yours will be the same sad story everywhere. No one will really care. No one more lonely than this rich, important man. Let's have your autograph, endorse your epitaph. You better take care of business, Mr. Businessman. What's your plan? Get down to business, Mr. Businessman, if you can.
You are tuned into the Court of Public Opinion with Leon Byner.
Well, one of the most respected people when it comes to money affairs around Australia is a bloke I've had associations with for a long time. It's Bob Gottliebsen. Bob, good to talk to you, and thank you for your time.
Yes, good morning.
How is the Australian economy going? And secondly, an addendum question to that is, how does South Australia fare?
Okay. Well, what's happening in Australia is that we've got two parts of the whole situation. First, those under mortgage and rent stress are suffering. They're cutting back their spending. They're doing all the things you expect in a situation like that. But those that are not affected this way, often older people, but not always, they're spending. They can be stimulated to spend. And so the Australia and also the state governments, particularly, but also the federal government, are spending like crazy. So the Australian economy is holding up much better than the Reserve Bank would have liked. And therefore the inflation rate is holding up.
Can I just interrupt? You're saying the Reserve Bank would have liked it if we were more poor or there was less money around?
They want inflation down. And the only way to get inflation down in their rule book is to slow the economy down.
Okay.
And normally that happens when you raise rates. But in this particular occasion, the blows are being impacted on a relatively smaller group of people. That is, that your rent and your, and particularly your mortgage stress.
Okay. So what then?
Well, what we've got in the world is a series of pressures which are impacting interest rates. And so we face the possibility of further rises in interest rates in the next 6 months. Now, I'm not forecasting that. I don't know what will happen on Cup Day. That's too hard.
Sure.
I'm talking about the next 6 months.
Yeah.
In particular, this war in Middle East is pushing up the price of energy, oil particularly. If that continues for a long time and that petrol price continues up for a long time, that will underwrite inflation. In Australia, we're suddenly starting to see wage claims of 5% by a series of groups that have got strength, industrial strength.
Sure.
So wages are starting to move up. The cost of businesses is moving up. We've stuffed up our electricity renewables program. We haven't done it properly. And so therefore power prices are going to rise further. In particular in the United States, there's an enormous amount of money that needs to be raised by Biden and his government for their spending. And the bond markets are saying, hey, fella, you've got to raise a lot of money. And so the US interest rates and bond rates are rising. That affects the whole world. And finally, in Australia, we have the doozy of them all coming. Come July 1, we're going to have a money shower. And that is that the tax rates for middle and higher income Australia are going to fall quite a lot. And that will inject a lot of money into that very community I was talking about that's spending a bit now. Now, it's possible that will be reversed, and we can speculate on that if you like. But as it now stands, it's legislated, and the government, the Albanese government, said, we will honour it. So they have to go back on their word. So we've got quite a lot of pressures coming in the next 12 months to put rates higher.
Wouldn't people logically use a lot of that money, or a proportion of them, to save, put aside, rather than just spend it?
They might, but that money is going to the very people that are starting to spend now.
Yeah.
Some of them have got mortgages and debt all over the place. And of course, they will save, and some will save. That's true, but some will spend, and it's $21 billion going out there into the economy.
$21 billion,
big amount of money. This is big stuff. So let's say we save a quarter of it, right, or half of it, if you like. It's still big, these are big. They're interesting tax cuts. They actually make a lot of sense because they basically mean that 94% of Australians will have a top tax rate of 30%. 30% is becoming the normal. You're seeing it in superannuation. Sure. Yes, people above $200,000 will be paying 45%, but 30% is going to affect most people. And of course, there's much lower rates right at the bottom end. But so that's a big change in our tax system, and it's coming in the mix amongst all these other things I've just been talking about.
All right. So, what's the big advantage of this change? How the ordinary person says, "Okay, what does it mean to me?"
It means, first of all, that you must prepare for the possibility of higher interest rates. That means that if you've got mortgage stress, start talking to your bank now, because your house will cost a lot more to replace. So try and hang on, because the banks are under pressure in terms of public and situations, and they will do deals. They'll do deals maybe that you only pay interest on your loan, but try and begin to work with your banker if you've got mortgage stress, and do it now rather than wait till you're in desperate trouble.
Yeah.
That's the first thing.
Yep.
For people under rent stress, if interest rates rise a bit further, the houses will stop going up, and this rent problem is partly to do with bad rental laws and stuff like that. So, to overcome that, we have to build more houses, and to do that, we have to make the zoning and the approvals process much easier. And finally, with South Australia, in South Australia, you have the chance of a lifetime. That is, a huge copper basin is going to be built in inland South Australia, and of course all that defence expenditure. So you have to work very hard to make sure that happens, because right now the federal government is introducing labour laws that will probably stop it, and it will go to Chile, it'll go to America, and perhaps Africa.
Why would they do that?
Well, because they have a political agenda. There's lots of things governments do that don't make sense.
Yes.
Now, by the way, this legislation covers much more than that. We will talk about it another time, but it does hit small business. It's designed to hit small business, and it will. It's going to make it very difficult for pensioners to get extra income. The Treasurer is saying, "Oh, look, pensioners, you can earn some more money." Well, the industrial relations legislation is going to make it harder.
Oh, they would know that, though. I mean, fancy coming out and saying you're going to earn more when they've just legislated so that it's going to be harder to do it. That's crazy.
That's right. And well, of course it is. But that's governments, right? and this particular government has been very concentrated on the yes/no campaign, on the yes part of it, and they really haven't been looking at much else. And,
no.
So it is. But these are all things that are happening at the same time. But interest rates, just be aware that if the world economy was to slow dramatically, including the Australian economy, if that happened and inflation started to come down, then that would be different. But right now, inflation has started to come back, but these other forces are coming in, and they're going to impact in the next 12 months.
What's our inflation rate at the moment?
We're down in the 4%, so
okay,
it's not too bad.
Yeah.
But it's in the 5%. That's right. Sorry, but it is not. It's sticky. The wage pressures are coming. We're still creating new jobs. there's a huge reservoir of people who want to work, can't, that are starting to work. There's a lot of part-time work there. So the income that's coming from this economy is pretty good. And that's why, by the way, we haven't had so many houses and people throwing in the towel with their mortgages. They're finding extra jobs and things like that. And that's good, by the way. That's excellent. But it doesn't help your inflation.
Okay, now the unemployment rate is supposed to be about 3.6 or below 4%.
Yes.
I don't believe that. I don't believe it. I think there are more people. I think, or maybe I should put it this way, there's a very big underemployment. See, you don't make unemployment statistics, and you can tell me whether this has changed, if you work an hour a week.
That's right. Yes, always be aware of this. There is a huge reservoir of people who, and they're often spouses, right?
Yeah.
Who want to work at the weekend, for example, because that's when the other part. Let's go to male, female, which is not correct, of course. But let's say the husband is working 5 days a week, and there's kids, and so the wife or the partner wants to work at the weekend, and it can be reversed. It can be the female with the main income earner, and they're having difficulty doing that because. Particularly on a Sunday, the shift allowances and penalty rates are too high.
Yeah.
And so we've got this reservoir of people who want an extra job, particularly at the weekend, and they can't get it. And that does not show up in the unemployment statistics as measured by the ABS. But if you look at the Morgan statistics, and there are others as well, they show up. And there's a huge reservoir of people wanting work that can't get it. And again, it's normally the shift allowances and penalty rates.
Sure.
You go along to a cafe at the weekend, particularly on a Sunday or particularly on a public holiday, and the only ones that can open are those that are able to charge more for their product, or it's a family business. Leon, this is a new problem. If we went back 5 years ago or 10 years ago, the cash economy was huge. And so all these people got paid in cash. And it sort of worked. Now, it's not good for tax revenue. I'm not suggesting it's a good thing, but that's how we did it. But now, when you pay your employee with cash, that employee has a lever over you as an employer. And he or she can go and take you to the courts and stuff like that. So you don't risk it. You don't risk it anymore. And so you now all pay according to the award. And so all these shift allowances and penalty rates, which we've been there for a long time, didn't affect things in the old days, but they do now. And that's new. Now, by the way, please don't think that I'm advocating we go into the cash economy. I'm not. But it overcame the shift allowances and penalty rates. And sometime in the future, we'll need to change that. I don't think we're going to do it immediately.
No.
But it's we've got to allow our people to pay their mortgages. By taking on extra jobs and things like that, because they've got a lot of debt, and if we force them out of the house, so they've got to sell the house, they're into the rent problem.
Let me ask you, how many people, or what proportion of people, have got more than one job? Because I reckon there'd be a stack.
Oh yes. And you'll never guess, of course, our good friends, the industrial relations legislation, means that a lot of those jobs are obtained on the websites where you tender for a particular contract and you take it and you do it. It can be Uber if you like, but there's a whole lot of others. And one of the aims of the new industrial relations legislation is to make it extremely difficult for those online marketplaces to work. And that's designed to make it much, much harder for people to do second jobs like that.
So that's going to affect a lot of people. Yes.
And it particularly affects pensioners, of course, but it affects everybody. It's been marvellous for pensioners. They can actually say, I'll do that job there at a time that suits me, but it also affects everybody else. And unfortunately, this fellow, the employment minister, he doesn't understand that. And he thinks everything is the old union way, where you get a job and it's your full-time job and you get it. Doesn't understand there's a whole world out there working casually, and there's a lot of labour that wants to work even more casually, and is prevented to do so by the penalty rates and shift allowances.
Is there any will by any government to change this? Because it seems to me, if you're in work, you pay tax for a start, you relieve the system of paying benefits because you have a job. Right. So I don't. Doesn't somebody sit down and do the maths on this?
We have to hope that because the current government, has put in a pretty stupid set of industrial relations laws, that it will make the opposition think about it, and the independents think about it. It's possible I should emphasise that this legislation is not through the Parliament yet. It's currently being held up by those wonderful 7 independent senators.
Yes.
And we have to hope if these senators hold their ground, and the government only has to get 2 of them, and they'll offer them all sorts of incentives and all sorts of things. But once again, it's gone. But so far, in the national interest, they're holding their ground. And we have to hope that happens. So I should emphasise that legislation is not through the Parliament yet, but it's got a very good chance of going through. It's been through the House of Reps. So I bet it will cause the coalition to look at this thing. And they've had a very big win, by the way.
Have they?
The No campaign has taught Australia that we have our latte sets that have got the politically correct people, but we have this massive body of 60% of the population that actually thinks about the nation, that has very different views and can be mobilised for good causes, like in their view, the No campaign.
Sure.
And basically what the Australian population said in the No campaign was, 1, we want to be one nation. We don't want to be 2.
Yes.
And secondly, if you are going to do something like that, you've got to tell us the details. In this particular case, the government very well knew the details, but knew if they put them out, there'd be 90%, not 60%. So they kept the details hidden. And so that was a disastrous situation to go to referendum on. But the point, leave the referendum aside, it showed there's a huge body of people, a lot of whom are ALP voters, who are thinking very differently to the way the current ALP government thinks.
What's the next challenge there, from your perspective?
Next big challenge, in my view, is twofold. First of all, we have to hope the industrial relations legislation doesn't get through, and we have to look at the lessons that we need to do in that area to even make it move the other way.
Yeah.
And secondly, we're stuffing up electricity, and that is going to underwrite our inflation, our whole industrial base.
When you say we're stuffing it up, just explain how we're doing that. What are we doing to stuff it up?
We've got a view that says that solar and wind are lower costs than any other power, and it's not right. It is right physically. Of course, imagine solar and wind produce power for nil cost on the day. But to get that power to the public, you have to spend a lot of money on wires, huge cables going through farms.
Yes.
And the stations themselves don't last very long. So that your investment has to be keep all our wind stations that we've put in now will have to be replaced in a decade or so.
Sure.
So that's first thing. Second thing is that you have to have backup because the wind and the solar that doesn't go all the time. So you have to have backup. Call it hydro if you like, call it batteries if you like, call it coal, call it gas, and call it nuclear. And what the rest of the world, of which we're pretty well alone, are saying the way to clean energy at a lower cost is modern nuclear, not the old style big power stations. These are smaller ones. You know, BHP, it's got a potash business that's developing in Canada.
Yep.
And it's been offered power there, which will be a small nuclear station not far away from the plant, at about half the Australian cost, maybe more, maybe even lower. And we've got to start thinking that way. It's not an evil process. These are not these big stations that we had before that were at high risk. We can't leave. We're still going to have wind, and we're still going to have solar, we're going to have batteries, we're going to have hydro. But we've got to add, like everybody else in the world, nuclear. You just can't believe. Just Indonesia, Canada, US, most of Europe, UK. There's about 15 or so different countries heading down this small nuclear route in some way or other. Different technologies as well, not all the same technology. And it was still waste, but it's much less, and it's better than these wind stations and these solar stations. They have their own waste. We need to work to manage the waste, and coal is a waste up in the air. So we need to manage that waste, because if we're going to go, and we are going to go, to a much lesser carbon emissions situation and at a fast rate, then you can't do it without nuclear, and you've got to be a lot more sensible in the way you use renewables, and we are not.
Are you optimistic that we can?
Down a disastrous route.
Yeah, well, again, a lot of this anti-nuclear stuff is rooted from years ago. Things have changed.
Yes, dramatically so, and indeed the three big nuclear crashes and disasters have taught the world what you had to do with nuclear to make sure that could never happen. And so in the US and Canada, you can put houses right up to a nuclear power station, which is much smaller now. They're much, and they vary from a small, very small, to pretty, 300 or so megawatts. So there's a boom going on there. And we're talking about these old stations, and that's unfortunately the federal government just doesn't understand.
Okay, but before I let you go, what's your big hope on this issue for Australia?
My hope is, first of all, that we will free up our labour markets so that we can get more people working at reasonable prices.
Yep.
And secondly, that we'll embrace proper power prices, proper power situations. And finally, we're going to have to find a way to reduce the cost of building a house. And when I say house, I mean a dwelling, right? Yes. It can be an apartment. And we can do that. We can actually make the cost of a dwelling maybe a third less. And we do that by cutting out all the enormous bureaucracies in the approval process. We do that by making it easier for a bit more standardised constructions, particularly in apartments and things like that. And we get rid of the bureaucracies that stop all these things. And so we have the ability to construct dwellings at a much lower cost than the current costs.
Is there any will by any government or opposition to remedy the over-administration of our country? And remember that in global terms, we're not a big country. We are geographically, but not in terms of numbers of people.
I don't think there's any will to do that, but there's starting to be an understanding in the housing market, just starting, that governments pretty well double the house price of a dwelling. So what I'm saying, reduce it by a third.
Double?
Still at 50%. Yes, double.
Goodness.
And that's all the taxes as well now. I left that out, right? So these things are not that hard to solve. But hang on, you've got to find some revenue for the state governments that are likely to lose it. But also you have to actually say to state governments, look, you just can't spend like lunatics as you've been doing. You've got to cut that back.
Seems to me what you're telling me is this, that governments often get pressured to do more housing, social housing, when really if they lifted the mockers on the private market, people would be a lot better off.
Yes, that's right.
That's what I'm getting from what you're telling us.
Yes, well, of course it's tried to. Now, that's particularly good so in Sydney and in Melbourne.
Yep.
It'd be less so in Adelaide, but it'd be there too, I'm sure, and because governments can't resist it. And by the way, what happens, of course, is that the local suburban pressure group says, we don't want that. And so they put a rule in, so you can't have those sort of places. And the approval, and remember, just think yourself as a developer of a dwelling, right? And you buy a block of land, and it takes you 2 years to get approval, whether it be a unit or whether it be a house. That's all cost. And then what these bodies do, they pass regulations that says, oh, we've got to have 2 pipes here, or we've got to have a wire this way or this way. And no one worries about the cost. So you've got to start to make the regulations simple and easy and effective. Make the approval process clear and fast, so that you know that if this is what I buy that land and I buy those rules, I will get approval, right? And so the whole process speeds up and cuts the cost. And of course, and you don't say, oh, you must do this, when it absolutely sends the cost of the place up, unless it's absolutely essential. So governments have to look at what regulations they've got and what approval processes they've got and how they make them smoother. And then they have to think about the costs of taxes they're putting on these buildings that you build. And if you do all those things and you put your tax burden somewhere else, then you'll reduce, certainly in Sydney and Melbourne, the cost by about 50%. Look, call it 40 or 50%. It's a lot. That's the point, is it's big. It doesn't
40 to 50%.
We can do these things, but, we don't actually elect people in the state governments that want to do that.
Bob Gottliebsen, thank you very much for joining us. It's always good to have you on the show. That's one of our top people. If you've got an observation on what he's just said, see, getting these things out in the public arena, don't ever think, oh, Leon, this won't change. My experience in public media life is that once you present people with information and you give it fairly without fear or favour, they can quite capably make up their own mind and they'll form their own views, and this in itself creates a pressure on governments. So your right to know, your ability to know stuff is really important. I'd love to get your observations on what you've heard this morning, but don't think for one moment, I've done this for too long to think that, that won't work, it's no point doing it. Not at all. You'd be amazed. I'll tell you something. When I do a contentious subject, and most are these days, it is most unusual if I don't get a call from one or two government minders or ministers themselves or oppositions about that particular segment and piece of information. So I've learnt to understand that you should never think for one moment, it won't change. Doesn't make any difference. It does. Love to get your viewpoint on many of the things, including this that we talked about today, 0491 656860. And there's another issue in this. There is a massive wait for public housing. There is a queue of thousands of people who are waiting to get public housing. Now, here is the problem. This is the rub. If you're on a queue to get public housing to which you are entitled, no argument there, you'll often be given a supplement to go out into the private rental market. But that in itself forces the cost up for everybody. So it seems to me that we do need probably a more significant proportion of social housing. If you and I, this would be really educative, and I don't know that I'm going to be surprised by the response, but if you're on the list or a waiting list for public housing, how long have you been on it? Now, I'm talking here Category 1. There's a lot of people, if you're on another Category 2 or 3, well, it's going to be the 12th of never. Johnny Mathis got that right. That's the person that sang that very big hit. Donny Osmond. Yeah. So if you're on the list for public housing and you've been waiting almost what seems like an eternity, ring me and talk to me, 0491 656860. Of course, it's true that in some circumstances, when I've been contacted by people that have got nowhere to live, particularly with children, often through some of our contacts we've been able to help, and that's a good thing to be able to do. But unfortunately, it's very hard to do it, almost impossible en masse. But if you're on the list, on the waiting list for a place to live, 0491 656860. Because I know that, and this is the information I get, there are thousands literally waiting for a property. Thousands. It's amazing, isn't it? Having a roof over your head is such a fundamental thing that you need. Many say it's a right, and I don't necessarily disagree with that. But this is the other thing. We're bringing in people from overseas, except where they're going to live. Where they're going to live. And that's the other thing. So if we bring in people from overseas, and I have no issue with that, except there's a practicality thing here, they've got to have a place to sleep. There's not going to be a hostel. So we've surely got to do something about this, because we bring in people from all over the place, and in principle I've got no issue with that, except that what we do is have a log jam once they arrive, because they're all fighting, metaphorically speaking, of course, to have a place to live. So I'd love to get your observations on this. Don't ever underestimate your opinion, because people take notice. They really do. 0491 656860. Gee, we've certainly hit some hot buttons today. Have your say? It's worth it.
You are tuned into the Court of Public Opinion with Leon Byner.
You're listening to the Court of Public Opinion with Leon Byner, where the time is 11 a.m.
Hey! What's the weather for the weekend gonna be? Will it be hot, cold, rain, snow?
And the weather today in Adelaide, it will be mostly sunny.
You may not find us on your TV, because in case you did not know, we're being brought to you by, brought to you on, brought to you by RADI.
Do you want to make a real impact in your community? Sponsor Jeremy Cordeaux's The Court of Public Opinion and be a part of something special. Connect with engaged listeners, showcase your brand, and support informed discussions.
Yes, oh look, I've been loving watching it. It's a true breath of fresh air.
Oh, well, I'm glad you found me.
Make your mark on Jeremy Cordeaux's The Court of Public Opinion, where voices matter.
Jeremy, I think it's wonderful that you're able to do this, because you have such wonderful history. You have a great connection with your audience. There are still many, many, many people who love you, and it's just great that you and others who may be in a similar position, who aren't working for a commercial station anymore, can do it and continue to do what they love doing, and not just for you, but for the listeners.
Sponsorship opportunities are limited. Act now and be part of the conversation.
Please join us. We'd love to have you.
Simply visit jeremycordeaux.com and click on sponsor.
I want to get to know you. I want to show you the peaceful feeling of my home.
Well, it's been a very enjoyable morning to have your company, and we've uncovered a few things, as we always do. I hope you have a wonderful and eventful and safe weekend, and Jeremy will probably be okay soon. He's just getting over what we call dreaded lurgy, but I've enjoyed talking with you, and I wish you well. Be safe.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.